Hello and welcome to another Vista tips and tricks video. This video is going to be focusing on the effects engine. Now that R3 has officially launched, I thought it was a good idea to kind of go over the effects engine in its entirety, so I can kind of show you all of the options and tools you have available to you when building your effects, and also look at some of the new features they've added, things like effect cycles and a lot of the fader and button options for your effects masters. So with that being said, let's get straight to programming. So before we actually even start with our effects engine, the first step to building any effect is your selection order, the way in which you select your fixtures. And this is arguably the most important step. If I link this back to a few questions I've seen on the Facebook group, people have been asking, how do I create a symmetrical effect, or how do I get it to go from top to bottom, etc. And it's all down to your fixture selection. I'll show you a quick example of how Vista interprets your fixture selection, and kind of once you get your head around this, it makes it incredibly easy to build effects, because Vista is very good at kind of interpreting your selection and then applying effect to it. So if I make a really basic selection of these lights, literally just a box top to bottom, and I create a new effect, you'll see that it runs top to bottom. If I go bottom to top and hit update selection down here, my effect now runs bottom to top. Same for right to left. If I now update it to go right to left, you'll see that I get a right to left direction in my effect. So just from this kind of really basic example, you can already see how kind of intuitive Vista's effects engine is. With a simple kind of change of direction, I can change how the whole effect looks. So using this principle, we can get more complex effects, things like symmetrical effects or odd and even effects, simply from knowing which way to select our fixtures. And there's a way we can save our fixture selections. So as you're going through your show and you're building effects, you might want to use the same fixture selections again and again and again, and if they're kind of complex fixture selections, you really don't want to have to kind of either type them into the command line or select them on the screen again and again and again. And that's where groups come in. So if we go over to our groups tab, I've already added a new page. I will usually have kind of an all tab for every group that I have, and then I'll have a page just for my effect selections. To create a new page in Vista, all you have to do is right click in any quick picker and go add new page, and then you can label it. So I've called this effects groups, and I'm going to show you kind of how that works now. If I zoom to these fixtures, you'll see that when I select them, I get little blue dots above each one, and this denotes my selection order. So if I select the first row from left to right, I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 going left to right. Same if I go in the opposite direction. I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the opposite direction. So when we save a group, we're not just saving the whole group of fixtures to call back, we're also saving that fixture selection. And this is kind of one of the key steps into being able to build effects very quickly. So I'm going to show you a few different fixture selections that might be useful for you. And I'm going to link them with like the questions I've been seeing about symmetrical effects, etc. So the first one will be a linear selection. So I'm going to go right to left, top to bottom on all of these fixtures here. So as you can see, we go from 1 to 36 in order, top to bottom. Then I'm going to save that as a group. And these are my light boxes, the cubes. So I'm going to call this cubes. And I'm going to call this LIN for linear. I'm now going to make a symmetrical selection. So when you're making a symmetrical effect, you need to start with a symmetrical selection. I'm going to show you one that I like to use the most. Obviously, there are many different ways to select things symmetrically, but I like to start from the top and using my draw over tool, do something like this. And now that you can see, our little blue dots with our numbers now follow that selection. So if I save this as a group, when I call this group back up again, it will also apply the selection ready for me to build a symmetrical effect. So I'll call this cubes sim. Now, the last selection I'm going to show you is a mirrored selection. So we're going to go back to our draw over tool, and we're just going to select our fixtures in a mirrored fashion from the center out. You will also notice that all of the odd numbers will be on one side and all of the even numbers will be on the other. And this is a really good reason to save your groups, because you don't want to be making this kind of selection again and again and again every time you want to build an effect, because it will take you a long time. So as you can see, I've got 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 over here, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 on this side. So this is a mirrored selection. So I'm going to call this cubes mirror. Now this is something that I will do for all of my fixture groups, kind of before I even get started. These are kind of like the 3 basic selections that I start with. Obviously, as you get kind of more involved into your show and your show specifics, you'll probably have even more selections with just, you know, some fixtures out of each group and not others. But these are kind of like the basic linear, symmetrical and mirrored groups that I will make for all of my fixture selections before I even get started. So to save a bit of time, I've created some effect selections for each of my fixture types. Each one has a linear selection, a symmetrical selection, and a horizontal mirrored selection. Now this is the type of thing I would suggest you do kind of at the beginning of your programming session or when you're building your show file, just so you've already got some kind of basic selections to be getting on with. If you fancy something symmetrical or mirrored, you've already got that there to start programming with. And also, as you kind of progress with your programming and you get some more specific or detailed selections, you already have somewhere to put them and keep everything nice and organized. So with our selections made, we can now click on one and then go to our effects engine to start programming. So by default, it will usually be over here on the right hand side of the screen, or you can get to it by using your effects soft key at the bottom. It can also be docked anywhere, so I like to actually have mine over here on the left. Reason being, I still have access to all of my controls, my presets, my groups, and the effects engine at the same time, because you can use them in tandem. And then I like to try and kind of just zoom to fit the center screen. So I basically have everything on one screen and I don't have to worry about navigating around the console. So with some fixtures selected, we can go ahead and hit New Effect. And when we do, we get a window that pops up that'll ask us what type of effect we want to create. And we have the choice between wave effects, swing effects, or video effects. Now, wave effects, as they might suggest, will send a waveform through your fixture selection, which you can then modify to get whatever end result you're going for. A swing effect will let you add in specific steps to an effect and then assign specific data to those effects. So as an example, if I wanted a color effect that went from red to blue, I would make 2 steps, make one of them red, make one of them blue, and then the effect would swing between those 2 steps. And video effects are actually intended for matrices, and we will be looking at them later on in the video. So after picking the effect type you want, we can come down and select what we actually want to run our effect over. So things like position, color, intensity, shutter, for example. In this example, we're going to go for intensity, so I'm going to select that and then hit OK. And as you can see, it's running over the fixtures in the selection order that we picked. So next thing we're going to look at is some of the filtering options we have at the very top. So as you can see, we can either show all effects, or we can filter just to our default queue list or our editor queue list. So that would be if I quickly jump into this queue list here and I hit play, you'll see that it's only showing the effects that are in this open editing queue list. Or we can go down to just what we're looking at in this queue, so we won't see any tracking, we'll only see the effects that are running in this queue. And if we go back to show all effects and then release this, go back to our live tab, if you're in editor queue list and you're in your live tab, it will also filter down to just what's running in live, so that can also be very useful. Next we have active only, so with this checked on, it'll only show you effects that are currently running. If you uncheck this, you can see that you can actually go and select effects that aren't running from different queues in your different lists. So this can be useful if you want to edit something in blind. Over here you have a box for selected fixtures only. So if you only want to see effects that are currently running over your selection, if you select this, they will appear here and it will filter that for you. And you can also refresh this list at any time. So this first section is all about kind of identifying what effect is playing over what fixtures and what do you actually want to filter to and look at. So now we have selected our new effect, we can now take a look at some of these other buttons that have now appeared. We have a stop effect, speaks for itself. If you can start an effect in Q1, it will track through Qs 3 and 4, and you can stop it in Q5, for instance. But if I delete the effect in Q5, it will delete it all the way through my queue list from its source queue. So that's removing that effect from that list. And then we have save template. So you can build your effect, and if it's something you like or you want to use again, maybe over a different fixture type, you can save it as a template and then kind of apply it to anything in the desk. Underneath that we have our tap rate. So the faster I tap this, the faster my effect will run, and the slower I tap it, the slower my effect will run. This is really useful if you're trying to time something up to a song. Having this button kind of in the effects engine itself is really nice. This also means you can kind of tap effect rate to something that doesn't belong to a master, but you still need it to be synced up. Below that, next to rate, we can actually dial in a BPM by typing it in, or we can drag and hold to make it faster or slower. Under that we have size, and exactly the same thing. We can either type in a size, or we can drag it to 0 or to 100. With intensity, size will be kind of the maximum output of this chase. So obviously the smaller the size, the dimmer the chase will be. Next to rate and size, we have masters for each. So to assign an effect to a master, you click on this box here, and we can either create a new master and label it here, or we can assign it to a master that we've already created. And I've already made a speed and size master here, so I'm going to click this one for speed and assign the size of this effect to size. And if we quickly go over to our playback section here, we can see that I've already docked my speed and size masters to my faders, and that was simple as literally just dragging and dropping them over. So for speed, on this fader I have the speed of the effect, but I also have tap time at the bottom, so I can set a rate on a button and then bring it down on the fader. And then for size, you want to make sure that you've got size actually attached to your fader, and you can do this by going over to your Effects Master Faders panel here, the same way you do with faders for your cue lists or groups, and drag across size. And then if I bring this down, you can see I can control the size. So after that, we have a couple of other little things that we can do. Obviously we can enable and disable this effect from this checkbox here. Now this can be quite useful if you want to say just disable this effect, do something with those fixtures, and then bring that effect back while you're programming. It just allows you to keep all of your settings in your effect as you've built it, but then quickly stop it while you do something else and then bring it back. And then we have per cycle and per fixture. And this basically determines how your tap rate or your BPM actually affects the speed of your effect. So if it was per fixture, every tap of my tap rate would be, if I quickly go over to snap, you can see that it's going every fixture for every tap of my tap rate. If I go to per cycle, it's a whole cycle per every tap rate. So this is just to determine kind of how you want your effect to react to speed. Do you want it to be per fixture for every tap, or a whole cycle for every tap? So depending kind of how you want this to play back. And now we get to kind of the fun bit of the effects panel, and this is kind of where we start to really build and shape our effects. So under here we have size, and this is size of the waveform, and this can be used in conjunction with the overall size. So as you can see at the bottom here, I can make the waveform more pronounced or smaller using this size here, and then I can also use that in conjunction with my size master over the top of it, so these will work relative to each other. And again, that is a kind of personal preference thing, how you want your size of your effect to react to your masters, etc. Underneath that we have our rate multiplier. So again, I can tap a rate on here, but maybe I want this to be quarter time of anything that I tap, or maybe I want this to be double of anything that I tap. It's just another way to define how you want this to play back in relation to the tap time or your masters on your console. Next we have one of the new features, which is really cool, and it allows you to basically define how many cycles of your effect are going to play before it stops. I did a video that kind of showcased some of these that's on Facebook, and hopefully from that video you can already imagine how effective this can be, and we're going to have a look at a few of these later on when we start building some cues. And then next to that we have direction, so we can go forwards, backwards, or bounce, and of course that will work in conjunction with our effect selection. Underneath that we can choose the base waveform that we want to use. So we have sine wave, square wave, sawtooth, and ramp, and each of these will give you a different quality to this effect. So obviously a square wave will be very snappy, sine wave will be nice and smooth, and something like a sawtooth is kind of halfway house. So you have a snap and a fade built into that. You can go further than this. You can customize the phasing from here as well, as you can see down here, and you can also be even more kind of detailed with kind of how you want this effect to react. So once you're happy with the kind of first step of creating a base waveform to run it through, and you've kind of checked out your speed and size options, we can then head over to the sequence tab. Now this is where we really start to kind of sculpt our effect. We have the first two boxes up here, which will control the overlap, and this is the overlap of your effect between each fixture. So as you can see, as I bring the overlap towards 50%, I start to get kind of a less of an overlap between each fixture, and as if I head all the way to 0, each fixture will actually do a whole kind of on and off cycle before going to the next one. So if I bring this back up towards 50%, our overlap gets closer between each fixture again, and then as I bring it to full, we kind of get a full overlap. Along with that, we also have stagger. So this is kind of like overlap, but for the whole cycle. So as I bring this towards 50%, you'll see that our effect will start to cycle and have a kind of longer pause between each cycle. And as we bring our overlap down as well, you can see we can get like a whole sweep of our effect before it starts again, and that's what this stagger is doing. So playing with these two options and finding the right values for you will determine kind of the overall look of your effect and how it will play back either between each fixture or as the whole cycle as a whole. And there's no right and wrong to any of this. It really is just kind of tuning these in until you have got the effect that you want. Then we have some more kind of functions for selection order. So we can either have it run over the selection, the idea, we can have it random, We can have it ascending or descending. And we can also apply a curve over the whole effect as well. And this will affect the whole effect cycle. So if I go to snap start, you can see that that has quite a big impact on how the whole effect runs. So this is another way to kind of customize your effect even further. And then we have some fanning options. Just like with your fixture chooser down here, you can have it work over a linear fan. You can have it work from the ends in, from the center out, etc. And we'll touch on these as we change our selection order as well. You can also decide how your multi-element fixtures are going to react. If you hit group elements together, it will, if your fixture has multiple pixels within it, it will treat it as one kind of whole pixel, a whole fixture, and run it across like this. If you hit select elements individually, it will run them across the pixels within your fixture. And we have some multi-element fixtures in this show file, and I'll be sure to show you kind of how that works with them. Under that, we have blocking and repeats. So blocking allows you to kind of group your fixtures together within the effect. So if I did a blocking of 3, and let's just slow this down a little bit and make the overlap something like 50, you can see that now my effect is running over blocks of 3. If I did blocks of 6, because of how my fixtures are selected and arranged, I get kind of like a whole row each time because they are 6 across. So you can also do multiple blocks. So you can have something like a block of 2, and then if I hit a slash and then 3, I get a block of 2 and then a block of 3 every time. 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, as you can see. And you can have a limitless number of these as well. So I can go 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. Now repeats, basically, like blocking, they work across the whole fixture selection. So if I do a repeat of 2, it will repeat over 2 whole groups of fixtures. If I do a repeat of 3, I get 3 repeats of the effect over 3 groups of fixtures. With 4, I get 4, 5, and so on. Now underneath all of this, we have a few extra buttons that help us with changing our fixture selection. So say, for instance, that I didn't want this to be a linear selection anymore, and I actually want this to be a mirrored selection. If I go over to my groups and I select mirrored selection now, and then I hit update, it will update my effect with my new selection, but it won't change any of the settings that I've already put into it. So I don't have to build this effect from scratch. I don't have to delete it and start again. If I want it to go over a different selection, I can simply pick the selection that I want and then hit update. So with a mirrored selection, as I said when I built it, all of our odd numbers are on one side and all of our even numbers are on another side. And we want these to kind of work in pairs. So we're going to need a blocking of 2 for any mirrored selection to work. And as you can see, as soon as we type 2 in, our rig physically mirrors itself as this effect runs through it. Now, there's one thing about a mirrored selection that I really like, and it's the fact that it doesn't matter what repeats you use now. If your selection is mirrored and you have a blocking of 2, I can now use any repeats with that at all. So I can use a repeat of 2 and it will work, and I can use a repeat of 3, or 4, or 5, or 6, and so on. So if you want kind of a really quick and easy way to get some symmetrical or mirrored looking effects running, a mirrored selection will allow you to then quickly bump through a load of repeats to find the mirrored selection that you want. So that's just a kind of a bonus thing to do with mirrored selections. Another couple of things that we've got down here is preview selection. That's what it says on the tin. If I click it, it will quickly show me a preview of the selection that was used for this effect. But one of my favorite ones is, say this is running in a queue list, and we've come back to edit it, and I've actually forgotten which group I used, or maybe I didn't use a group and I want to store a group from it. I can select any fixture, and if I hit apply selection, it will then immediately apply the selection that was used when this was built and it will put it down here in your custom sorts tab for you as well. So the last thing we're going to look at is the Advanced tab. Now the Advanced tab is where we can start to add other attributes to our effect. So say I want this to also contain zoom. I can go down here and hit the plus button, and I can then select another attribute. So if I want zoom, I'll hit zoom, hit OK, and now we have zoom added to our intensity effect, and it adopts all of the sequencing that you've already built for your intensity effect. So you can start with one layer and then add multiple layers on top of it, and this is where we can get into some really cool advanced effects. But the nice thing is you also have separate tabs for your zoom and intensity, so you can still kind of have individual control of the zoom separate from the intensity, even though it's synced up to it. So I can also change the size of the zoom relative to the intensity. So I can make it smaller or bigger. I can change the rate, so I can have the zoom running at double the rate of the intensity if I wanted to. I can also change the base waveform, so my intensity is a sine wave, but my zoom is a snap. Or I can have it a sawtooth. And as you can see, just by changing these values, I'm already able to create some actually really nice looking stuff, and this is just an example. So if you actually sit down and kind of really tweak some of these things to your liking, hopefully this is a good demonstration of how you can really generate some cool looking effects very quickly. Another thing you can do in your Advanced tab is you can actually drag the waveforms and line them up in any way that you see fit. So if I want my sawtooth wave to work kind of differently to my intensity waveform, I can drag and line them up any way that I want. And again, this is all about just kind of looking at the stage, playing with these attributes until you find the effect that you want. And you can add as many of these as you want. So I can now go to color mix as well, and I can add kind of like an RGB chase to this if I wanted to, and I can decide kind of how I want this RGB chase to kind of line up with everything. I can decide what I want in my color, so maybe I don't want anything except yellow, so it's going to go between white and yellow. Or maybe I also want to add in magenta as well, so now I've got yellow and magenta running, but I haven't got any cyan. Or maybe I want some cyan in there and no magenta. So I can quickly just drop in and drop out what I want, and it's all following kind of this waveform principle, and then we can kind of adjust the waveforms in conjunction with each other until we get the effect that we want. So next thing I'm going to show you is the base points, but to do that I'm going to set up a queue so we can kind of see the different types of base points. So next thing we're going to discuss are base points and kind of how they work with our effects and with the effects engine, and some of the things required to get them to work properly. And this is also a good opportunity to look at position wave effects and answer a question of how to create symmetrical circle effects. So I'm going to see if I can tie all this in together at the same time. So as I've stated previously, the easiest way to get a symmetrical effect is to use a symmetrical or mirrored selection. So I'm going to use my mirrored selection for my spots here, and then I'm going to pick new effect, I'm going to pick wave effect, and then position. Now straight off the bat you'll see that this isn't a symmetrical or mirrored effect. There's still a few things we need to tweak, and you'll probably notice there are some differences between the position effects tab and the intensity one. And that is, instead of waveforms, we have kind of some basic shapes that we can pick from. And just like our waveforms, we can then kind of adjust these to get the effect that we want. So in the case of having kind of this tilt effect, this tilt shape, we have the option to rotate it. So if I rotate this by 90 degrees, I will get a pan wave instead of a tilt wave. Or if I do 45 degrees, I can have this kind of diagonal look going on. With things like the figure of 8, we have the option to change how many loops it goes through. So I can change this from 2 to 4 loops, for instance. And obviously, we have width and height. So we can either put a direct value into one of these boxes, or we can drag these boxes, like many other options in Vista. You also have kind of a width and height slider on the preview screen as well. So there are a few ways to kind of get the basic shape that we want. So we're just going to go for a simple circle to start with. And then at the bottom, we have the reverse drop down, and this is where we can get some symmetrical looks happening. So with a mirrored selection, we have all of the odd numbers on one side of our rig, and we have all of the even numbers on the other side. So by going down to reverse and say reversing the odds, we are physically reversing half of the rig. Now it's not quite perfect yet, as we're still staggered one after the other. So we need to go to our sequence tab and then hit a blocking of 2. And as you can see, now everything has a mirrored pair. So if I hit the preview selection button down here, you'll see we get 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, and so on. So this is a really easy way to generate a mirrored or symmetrical look. Now, same as before, we can play with the overlap of how each fixture works with the next one. We can also work with the stagger, so you get some really nice looking things. Same rules apply with the order, fan curve, blocking and repeats. So I can do a repeat of, say, 4. But we also need to look at base points. So if an effect is bound and only uses its own base point, it will only use the base point it was programmed with at the time. So, and by base point I mean, if I bring the size to 0, the position that this effect is actually running over. So at the moment it's running over this kind of downstage position. If I bring the size of that effect back in again, you'll see that that is the base point it's running over. So if it's bound, if I now try and move these lights using, say, another cue list with some positions in it, if I move them to the up, you see that effect stops. Because it was a bound effect, it will only obey that base point. If I move the base point from another place in the desk, it will stop that effect. So this can be useful in some scenarios where you want to fire off an effect, but when you hit another position, it stops that effect and then goes to it. So there are kind of advantages to this as well. If I now release the effects cue and then play it again, you'll see that it will also start the effect, but it will take control back to that base point. So it's that kind of thing of whatever plays last will be active. So if I now move the base point again using another cue, that effect will stop. If I hit go on this cue again, it will start that effect, but it will move my lights back to where it was programmed from. So there are some advantages there. If we use a free base point or use any base point, what it will actually do is you can move the effect around using information from somewhere else in the desk. So I can use these 4 position cues to move that effect that's running in another cue list because it's now a free effect. But just as before, if I stop this effect and then play it again, it will immediately start again where it was first programmed, and from then it allows me to move it around. So this is kind of a halfway house in kind of what it will let you do. And then the last one is don't use own base point. So with this selected, you must provide it a base point from somewhere else, because it won't use the one that it was programmed with in this queue. In fact, you can't actually program one without giving it an external base point. So you need, in the case of a position effect, to supply it pan and tilt information from somewhere else in the desk before it will actually run, because it requires an external base point to run. But what this means is when I stop this effect and start this effect again, it will stop and start from wherever my lights are pointing. So it won't go to its own base point first and then be free. It will basically follow wherever the lights are. So if they're on the singer and then I start this effect, they'll go around the singer. If I stop the effect, they'll stop at the singer. If I go back to this kind of up position and then hit go, they will start around that up position and then they will stop at that up position. So they're completely free, but because they don't use their own base point, if I don't have any position information active in the desk and then I try and play this effect, you will see that it doesn't run. And that's because it actually requires another base point from somewhere in the desk. So to get it to work again, I have to provide some pan and tilt information, and then I can refire this cue, and my don't use own base point or free effect will run again. So it's kind of like 3 levels of freedom. Bound, it will only do what it was programmed to do, and if you try and do anything else, it will stop. Free is it will start where it was programmed, but then you can move it around. And don't use own base point is it will basically latch on to any other position information that you're providing from somewhere else. So it's 3 levels of freedom. When I'm busking, I prefer to use don't use own base point, so I can use it in conjunction with my position presets. So when I start and stop effects, they start and stop wherever my lights are pointing in that moment. If I want an effect to play back exactly as I programmed it, I would use a bound effect, because then it will go straight to that and won't be interfered with by anything else. So it's kind of personal preference, and also kind of what you're trying to achieve with your base points, which will determine which one you choose. So we can also assign all of this to masters as well, just like our intensity effect. So I'm going to go speed and size. Now, as you can see, the speed master has kind of made my lights go slightly crazy, and that's because unlike other attributes, pan and tilt actually has a physical limitation. So if you have an LED parcan, you can flash the color as fast as you want, because it's kind of an instantaneous thing that has an upper limit to how fast it can go. But with pan and tilt, it can only go as fast as your mover can physically move. So for that reason, I like to use my rate modifier, and I run most of my position effects at quarter time. And that means that no matter what my tap time is, even if it's quite fast, so that's 122 BPM, you can see that my position is still able to keep up with that, even though it's a fast BPM. Another nice thing is, because we have it attached to a size master as well, we can use our size master to bring it down, stop it wherever we want, and then we can move our lights around, and then we can use our size master to bring that effect back in a different position. So this is something that's actually very powerful, and I like to do quite a lot, especially when busking, to use size masters to actually kind of hide my effects. Technically that's still running, and then I can move that effect to where it needs to be, and then bring it in again. And as you can see, we can start off nice and small around our singer, or we could make it much larger. We can make it very fast, or we can bring the speed right down. And as with our intensity effect, we're also able to add other attributes to it in our advanced tab. So we can hit the plus button on here, and we will go for intensity as well. And as you can see, our effect is running across our lights, but the intensity is running at 1 times, and our position is running at quarter time. So we can sync them up by simply matching them both up together, and then we get this kind of cool stepped effect where everything is synced up. We can also reduce the overlap if you want more of a kind of staggered stop and start type of effect. And we can reduce the stagger as well. So there's lots of ways we can customize our effects. Like I said, we basically pick a base shape or a base wave and then use all of the tools that we have in our kind of sequence and advanced tabs to generate the type of effect that we want. And then we add base points to this to determine kind of how they're going to play back. And then we add speed and size masters to give us more control. So the next thing we're going to look at is some of the speed and size master options that we have available to us. So now we're going to have a look at some effects master options. So I'm quickly going to throw in just a nice and easy chase. I'm also going to zoom these in a bit. Just go for an easy kind of intensity chase type thing. Blocking of 2 because it's mirrored, and we'll change the overlap to 50, and let's do a repeat of 2. There we go, something like that. So now if we go to speed and size masters, I want this to be per fixture, and now we're able to tap a beat in. Actually, let's make this a repeat of 4. There we go. And now we can have a look at some of the extra FX Master buttons that have been added. So we have a lot of new stuff to actually be looking at. We have a few double rates, half rates, quadruple rates, and some different ways of using them. So we have a straight double rate. If I put this on a button, as you can see, it will double the speed of whatever's playing. If I then put half rate below that, it will go back to half rate. If I tap half rate again, you'll take whatever you've put in and then double it, and then I can double it again, and then I can double it again. So this kind of stuff is really good for build-ups. I can half it and half it, bring it down slower. But what's also really nice is we have temporary versions of these too. So I can do a temporary double rate and a temporary half rate, and it lasts as long as I'm holding the button down. So if I hold down, I get a double rate, and when I let go, it goes back to wherever it was doing. And if I hold down, I get a half rate, and it goes back to whatever it was doing. So as you can see, this is already an extremely powerful tool. And we have quadruple rate as well. So we can throw in a temporary quadruple rate and a temporary quarter rate. So I can go really, really fast and then let go, or I can drop it right down and let go. We also have zero rate. So this is kind of like a freeze. So I can basically tap this to stop my effect at a 0 rate, and then I can tap back again to get it back. I have a temporary 0 rate, so it works in the same way, except I have to hold my finger down on it, so I can stop it, and then bring it back, stop it, bring it back. So you can freeze an effect on a button wherever it is, and then let it carry on. And then you have the same for size. So if I throw in a position effect over the top of this, so we'll go to advanced, I will add position to this as well. Reverse the odds. Again, I'm going to go quarter time for my position. I'm also going to drop quarter time for my intensity. So I have this kind of cool little position effect happening here. Increase the overlap a bit so we can see a bit more of this effect. Cool. So if I have this effect running like this, I can then quadruple the rate if I need to. Let's go half time for everything, because it's a small effect. There we go. So this is what I mean by kind of judging the size of your effect with your kind of rate multipliers. It's kind of up to you how you want this to react. So if it doesn't feel right, change it. So there we go. We can quadruple that rate. But we can also, we have size on here. So we can have size on the fader, but we can also temporarily freeze the size as well. And then back in, which can be a really cool and easy way to go kind of between two riffs of a song. So you might have a moment where they're singing, and then drop into a guitar riff, and then back to where they're singing, and the guitar riff, and they're singing, guitar riff. And it's really easy. All you've done is triggered one effect, but using your masters, you're able to manipulate this effect kind of however you want. We can slow it down, speed it up, slow it down, speed it up, stop it. You know, have complete control using a lot of these new effects buttons. So they've done a really good job adding all of these new features in. You pretty much have everything you need at your fingertips, and you can build it very quickly. So yeah, this is kind of wave effects in a nutshell. I can't think of anything else to kind of show you for wave effects. So I'm going to end this video on here because we've already got through a lot. So there's quite a lot for you to kind of take in, and I don't want to bombard you with too much information in one go. The next video, we're going to look at swing effects, and then I'll probably do a video after that looking at matrix effects. So, as always, if you have any questions about anything that I've shown you in this video, or you have ideas for more videos, or you need something explained a little bit better, please let me know either in the comments on YouTube, on Facebook, or on the forums. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.